Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new webinar, our famous Carbon Talks, number 9. We're very happy to be with you this morning. I'll be waiting maybe a minute or two before starting in order for people to log into the webinar. However, I'm very glad to be with you today. It's an important topic we're going to cover, the Scope 3 decarbonization and especially supplier engagement. So we've heard a lot of, and we've met with a lot of clients that struggle with engaging the supplier, reducing their Scope 3 carbon footprint. And today I'm very glad to be welcoming an esteemed guest, Vincent Ducrot from Getlink, CSR and Sustainable Development Director, along with two of my great colleagues, Blandine and Emmanuel. Blandine is head of the Climate Advisory, and Emmanuel is head of our product. For those who might not be familiar with carbon metrics, in a few words, we are a consulting firm on decarbonization, and we have a hybrid approach with the platform that also supports our consulting work. So this is why Emmanuel is the key person today to be talking to you about how we handle supplier engagement through our product. Without further ado, I will give you a bit overview of what we're going to cover today. So very simply, we're going to cover why engaging the value chain is crucial in the decarbonization journey, but I think you're probably already aware of it. And then how to engage practically your suppliers. And then this will cover approximately, I'd say, half an hour. And then we'll have a 15 minutes discussion with Vincent to understand how Getlink approached this supplier engagement. And of course, you will have, you can ask questions, and we will keep a dedicated 15 minutes at the end to make sure we answer those. So the question tab can be found at the bottom right corner of the screen. So do not hesitate, and we will cover them at the end. If I haven't forgotten anything, then I will leave the mic to Blandine to start with the introduction on the topic.
Thank you very much, Agathe, for this introduction. And hi, everyone. Happy to be here to talk about supplier engagement today. So as Agathe said, to kick things off, we need to talk about why this is important to decarbonize the value chain. Obviously, this is not an option if we want to collectively achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement that are to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Because when we look at a standard carbon profile of a company, like we have here on the left, we all know that Scope 3 emissions generally represent around 90%, up to 90% of the total emissions. And within the Scope 3 emissions, moving back to this slide, within the Scope 3 emissions, in a lot of different sectors, when we look at these specific emissions, again, a vast majority of them come from purchases of goods or services. So when you want to tackle your own emission as a company, you need to start looking at your suppliers and their own emissions. So that's why we are talking about decarbonizing the whole value chain and collectively doing that. And we see that there is already a shift going on because more and more companies are committing to decarbonization initiatives like the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And here, when we look at the different reasons why companies should commit, we see that more than half of them say that it's partly because of requests from their customers. So this is really a matter of business and relationship between companies. And we also know that we have many different drivers for companies to look at carbon as a value creation topic. At CarbonTalks, we often say that carbon is business. And so here we have different kind of reasons why companies and their suppliers should really engage into this topic and value carbon performance. So first, as we mentioned, we have the adaptation to ecosystem demand. your stakeholders, your investors, your customers, obviously. But then carbon is also about anticipating future regulations like the CSRD. There are a lot of going and back and forth on this topic, but we need to stay on top of things. Then gaining market shares in a more and more competitive market, carbon can be a value driver. Then when you look at carbon, it's also sometimes the opportunity to identify cost reductions and resilience against climate risks. And it's also a driver to access finance from investors, lenders, and in the end, also to value your employer brand. So now we have covered the why this is important to talk about supplier engagement. Now we will focus more on the how. So how to get started with this kind of strategy to engage your supplier in your own decarbonization. So we have broken this down into 3 steps. The first is about knowing your suppliers and expenses. This is really the first step, which is crucial to make sure that the rest then will be successful. So moving on to the step 2, which is collecting the carbon data of your suppliers. And in the end, the ultimate goal, obviously, is to improve your suppliers' emissions once you have their data and know what you are talking about. So I will deep dive in each of these steps, and then Emma also will introduce some demonstration of our tool at Carbometrics can help on these different steps. So moving on to step 1, knowing your suppliers and expenses. So as I was saying, the first step is really to have the most accurate data on your suppliers to make sure that the rest of the campaign will be a success. And we are talking about quantitative data, but also qualitative data, because first you need to really qualify the relationship you have with your suppliers. So knowing who they are and what kind of relationship you had with them. So on this step, your internal buyers from the purchasing teams can be really helpful as well. Then obviously you have to quantify the expenses with the number of expenses. Is it a one-off or a recurring expense with this kind of suppliers? Then it's interesting also to try to qualify as much as possible the expenses with the different type of categories, and even a short and clear description of what each expense is to make sure that you internally know what you are talking about, but also when you will talk with your supplier, you have a common language of what type of expense you are looking at. And finally, of course, information to be able to get in touch with your suppliers. It can be email address, but if possible, also phone numbers can be really useful, obviously, to go in more intimate relationships with your most important suppliers. So once you have all this data about your suppliers and your expenses, you can use this data to create different segments within your suppliers to make sure then that you will focus and prioritize your efforts where it matters the most in this future supplier engagement campaign. So first, you can divide your suppliers in different groups based on their materiality in your supplier mix. So for instance, in terms of weight in your total expenses, but also in terms of level of dependence or criticality in the relationship. And then amongst the most critical suppliers, you can also try to identify the most mature in terms of climate. So based on publicly available data, whether they share their carbon footprint, whether they are committed to SBTi, for instance, because here you have your future champions in terms of climate performance, and you will be able to tailor your approach based on this level of maturity. And yeah, so creating these segments will then enable you to have a specific approach for each of them in terms of how to run the campaign? Do you provide a tailored questionnaire or a more generic one? Is it very detailed for the most mature, or more simple for the less mature on the climate topics? And what type of support will you provide? Will you call them? Will you help them fill in the questionnaire, and so on?
So the way we carry out this supplier engagement at Carbometrics is we always have a hybrid approach between platform and consulting. So we really believe that it's important to have a consultant helping the companies on this kind of mission, because there's a lot of data to treat, to clean. There's a lot of tailored questionnaires, for example, to create. And we try to have the best of the platform to automate certain tasks and to visualize results, but also with consultant support. So I will share with you a view of our platform to explain how it works concretely. So we have a supplier engagement module to support this mission. The first step, as Blandine described, is to import suppliers and expenses. Here you can see that there's no upload button, because we believe that there's a lot of back and forth between companies and our consultant to clean this data. To have, for example, a clean description of each expenses, which is not straightforward when you have an extract of your expenses. And also, there's a lot of things that can be tailored, for instance, to associate tags or descriptions to each expense, to be able to have more visualizations that I will show you later on. So once all this is clean, we can import the list of suppliers and expenses. As you can see here, they're ordered by amount of expenses. If we looked at an example, it looks like this. So there's all the information that Blandine describes, the group of the supplier. So is it a critical or low priority supplier, for instance? The emails associated to the supplier, so that the platform can automate launch and reminder email sending. And we can also have the details of expenses. So here, for the sake of this demo, we have a company that purchased sensors and installation services from this electro-events provider. You can see that by default, we try to associate a generic emission factor to all expenses. So here, for example, you will have a really from climatic, general electric and machinery emission factor associated to this expense. It's better than nothing, but it's not perfect. And that's why I'll switch back to the slides to show you this. It's important to set expectations at the beginning of this project and to understand which kind of data we want to get. Because generic emission factors, which is the orange level here, it's basically an average based on the industry that is quite large and not very precise. Again, better than nothing, but not that good. The first level of accuracy that we can try to get is a company carbon footprint. So this means that your supplier A, for instance, has performed a carbon footprint, and we divide this by their turnover and multiply it by the expense. So it's a generic emission factor for the whole supplier company, meaning that if your supplier, for example, produces many different products or has different sub-entities in China, in Europe, in the States, it doesn't really cover the reality of an individual product. That's why it's more interesting to try to have a product or service carbon footprint, which is really, okay, to produce this steel sheet, I purchased this material and I consume this energy in this factory, and this gives you a way more precise carbon footprint. But not everyone has done this calculation, and it's hard to get this kind of data, even though we're trying, of course. So that's it for the expectations of what we want to collect. Now the next step is to launch the campaign. So to do so, we first send launch emails to each supplier. So you can see an example here. Again, it's automated by the platform, but it can be, for instance, the number of emails that are sent, the frequency of the reminders can be tailored to each supplier depending on if they're critical. They can also be adapted to a single supplier if you have a special relationship and you know that I don't want to send an email today because we had a discussion yesterday and it will be weird. So we can adapt to each supplier, and it's important, as Blondine said, to respect the relationships that you have, especially with big suppliers. The emails are also, we can tailor them to each supplier, and we try to have a branding that lowers the quantity of email that will be reported as spam or this kind of things, because it can happen. Then in this email, there's a link where the supplier can have access to a questionnaire that looks like this. Again, each questionnaire can be tailored for a group of supplier. As Blondine said, for instance, we can have more generic questionnaires for low priority suppliers, while critical suppliers will have maybe a longer and more adapted questionnaire. What's interesting here is that it's not a one-off page where data is entered and then it's sent. It's a questionnaire they can come back to. And for instance, the person that receives the link might have some data available, but then they can share it internally because maybe there's another person in the supplier's company that has more information and they can fill it in, complete it. If the campaign was carried out on several years, the supplier also has access to past years' data to be able to compare or maybe to help them fill in the questionnaire for this year. Sorry, Blondine, I'll go back to the platform. So now that the emails were sent and the questionnaires were opened, hopefully by the suppliers, you can go back on the platform and check, for example, the emails history. It's organized in two tabs. So you have a tab that's called Suppliers to visualize all suppliers and expenses. And then there's a tab called Dashboard to visualize results and follow the project along, more for project management purposes. At this stage, this first graph was meant to follow where the suppliers are at in the data collection. So for instance, here you can visualize by number of supplier or, for example, by expenses. You can see that most suppliers are in the ongoing stage. 21% of them have answered. Some of them are marked as not received. This is where the consulting part of the mission is also important, because this can mean that the email was wrong or that it was reported as spam, for instance. The consultant will then manually, for critical suppliers, try to understand where the problem is, for instance, change the email or try to contact them in another way. So that's a thing that we can really adapt depending on suppliers and the demands of the client, of course. You can see here that the last part is called reviewed. This is because when we receive carbon data from the supplier, they are not automatically integrated into the dashboards and the calculations. They are checked by the consultant. This is because there are several levels of understanding of what a carbon footprint or a product carbon footprint is among suppliers, of course. Not everyone is an expert, and some data needs to be checked, the level of accuracy, etc. And for instance, some suppliers will declare their carbon footprint and associate a file, for example, a sustainability report, and our consultant will be able to check the accuracy of the data, that all the categories are included, etc. So once this data is reviewed, it can be associated to expenses. So here you can see that, for example, here we have supplier data that was associated with this expense. It's a supplier declaration, and it's way more precise than the generic emission factor that was associated before. So once the campaign is going on strong and we collect carbon data and we have more accuracy, we can visualize results. So here it's a view of CO2 emissions associated with purchases of goods and services. It can be classified in several ways. Here it's by GHG category, for instance, or it can be by type. Here we associated type to each expenses. There can be a number of breakdowns possible. That's one of the things that is also tailor-made. Any tags can be reflected here on this graph so that you can visualize your emissions in the way that speaks to you. And for each category, there's a detail of expenses. which emission factors was used, if it's a supplier declaration or a generic one, for instance. And there is a link to the supplier page where you can go check the exact answers of the supplier if there's any doubt or precision that is required. And then the rest of the dashboard is to help you follow along the project and understand how the maturity of your suppliers and your whole value chain. For instance, this one is to compare year on year. If you do the campaign several years in a row, the accuracy of the data. Here you can see that in 2025, we had 31% of supplier-specific carbon data compared to 0% in 2024. It's a demo, it's never 0%, but you see what I mean. And we also have a vision of the maturity of your suppliers. So, for example, not started will be suppliers that didn't send any carbon data or where no public carbon data was available. While capturing data is at least a carbon footprint was calculated for this supplier. Then you have in decarbonizing suppliers that put in place actions to try to reduce their emissions, while aligning to net zero are suppliers that have formal engagements, commitments to be in line with the Paris Agreement. You also have this maturity visualization in terms of SBTi commitment. Specifically, if you yourself have an SBTi commitment, it's important to be able to follow the status for your suppliers to know if you're in line, because it depends on the percentage of your suppliers that are committed. So I will give back the mic to Blandine. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Ma. So now we have collected data from our suppliers, and now we can move to the last step of this supplier engagement strategy to see how we can improve the emissions related to the suppliers. So the idea is to define different approaches based on the output of this campaign and the data that was provided by suppliers. So for suppliers who actually shared data, we can look at a matrix like this one to have a different level of behavior. So for critical suppliers that have a good carbon performance or ambitious decarbonization objectives, the idea obviously is to keep them, since they are your champion and your allies in your own decarbonization, to track their performance also over time to make sure that they will actually decarbonize as planned, and to cherish them to make sure that you keep a good relationship with them over time. Then for your critical suppliers who have a low carbon performance, you can try to influence them by at least computing their carbon footprint year over year, maybe providing them training, resources, information, or providers to make sure that they can move on their own decarbonization journey. And if at some point you see that it doesn't make them evolve to the left, then maybe you should consider replacing them by other suppliers that have a higher carbon performance. Then for your non-critical suppliers that have good carbon performance, still the same here, keep and track their performance. But now for the non-critical suppliers that have a low carbon performance, maybe it's a lower priority and you can act on them later to see if you have to replace them or not, whether they move or not along the way. So that was for the suppliers who share data, but obviously you will have a lot of suppliers that don't share data because either they don't care or they don't do anything or they just missed the deadline and so on. So the idea will be to iterate on your campaign to improve your coverage rate year over year. It's really not a one-off strategy to launch 1 year and shut down the year after, because this is also a long-term work with all your suppliers. So maybe you can find other contacts, rework your segmentation, your approach, etc., to make sure that you gather more and more data for the following years. So yeah, that's it for the way we see supplier engagement strategy at Carbometrics. So now we will leave the mic to Agathe and Vincent.
Thank you, Blandine. Thank you, Emmanuel. Before jumping to the testimony part of this webinar, I will quickly just publish a quick poll to understand why you're interested in supplier engagement today. And I think this will also give a bit more light to what Vincent can touch upon. So you can submit your vote, and we will look at it closely. Thank you very much. So I will now welcome Vincent on stage. And maybe not on stage, because otherwise I cannot move the slide. But maybe I will put you on stage later, but you could still open your mic. So welcome, Vincent. Before jumping into the questions and the core of Getlink's supply engagement, could you maybe briefly present yourself and give some overview of Getlink activity and key numbers, please?
Of course. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Agathe and the team, for inviting Getlink here. I'm the head of sustainability at Getlink. Getlink is a French-UK company, a leader in low-carbon transportation of people, goods, and electricity. So we are working on the European environment, basically based on these four group business units I was mentioning. Infrastructure manager in terms of channel, tunnel, railway infrastructure. We also operate rail freight services across France and Europe, and we have high voltage cable in the tunnel, which diversifies also our activities, like another services that we brought to the market with a small border formalities. We are 1.6 billion revenue with 3,700 employees, principally mainly in France and UK.
Thank you, Vincent. And maybe to start with, can you briefly give us the context of why you decided to launch a supplier engagement campaign and look at this carbon data of your supply chain more closely?
Sure. For us, supplier-related GHG emission account for roughly 7% of our Scope 3. So we have globally a decarbonization strategy about Scope 1, 2, and 3. And for us, tackling our suppliers for the decarbonization of Getlink indirect emission was a must-go. We are dealing every year with a various number of suppliers, around 1,800 every year, which are active. And even if we have a solid framework in terms of sustainable procurement, we do not have any specific tool to collect sustainability information. We didn't have so far, whether it was quantitative or qualitative information. For instance, we are not a user of EcoVadis system, for instance. So it was one of the reasons why we decided to tackle this subject of supply engagement. And we had a first target on SBTi aligned with 1.5 degree on Scope 1 and 2 in the time window from 2019 up to 2025. We had also a target at that time for the Scope 3, specifically an absolute target of reducing our emission related to suppliers, so the category 3.1 and 3.2 of GHG protocol. And we had to think of a renewed target beyond 2025, so in the 2030 horizon. And that's the reason why we decided also to upgrade our supplier engagement campaign.
Okay, before you were just working with I don't know, Excel file, your own platform. Could you tell us a bit more about this and
Yes.
and the friction, and maybe a quick of the friction that you encountered and that you were looking to eliminate?
Sure. Yes, you're right. We were just managing a couple of Excel files to build up our carbon footprint. Globally, for us, carbon footprint for Scope 3 is about 100,000 tons of CO2, to give an order of magnitude. We had a lot, of course, of interaction with the suppliers, nevertheless, for the last 4 years. We tried to go to the supplier, requesting some specific emission factor, trying to understand the sustainability of the product, but it was really difficult to manage all the emission factors from one year to another, following the fact that we have renewed suppliers basically for us every 3 years. We have a change in suppliers. It was, again, as I said, difficult to collect feedback, qualitative information. So that was the first key point we wanted to tackle. And moreover, of course, the time that we dedicated to this collection of information was not focused on the analysis by purchasing category, for instance. We didn't have a very broad and detailed appreciation of the emission factor of our suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided to try to find a service provider for us to help us make it more robust, this evaluation of the indirect emission from our suppliers.
Thank you. We're very glad that we were chosen then. So if we talk more closely about the campaign and specifically using the tool and coordinating everything, could you maybe give us a bit of insight of the internal resources? I mean, just for the viewers, the audience to size what's required to actually conduct a campaign this size successfully.
Sure. Yes, I wanted to remind that I, of course, take part of the CSR, the Sustainability Department, but we are working closely with the Purchasing Department, and in most companies, basically, this is the Purchasing Department which has a lead of such type of initiative. We basically, what we had to do internally with a small team, I have, let's say, one people dedicated in the overall CSR quantitative information, so across environment, but also social and supply chain information. And we focused on trying to build structured information because, of course, as talking about tool and supporting a device platform, we need to have structured information upstream. It means, as Blandine said in the presentation, we have to know precisely the list of suppliers we want to capture, the expense on a specific period. We also have to find a proper reference for every expense line. So basically, it's purchase order reference. We have also to make sure that every expense has a purchaser category and also carbon emission by default, because of course,
Mm-hmm.
As you presented before, the target is to find the proper specific emission factor from our suppliers. But in case we cannot, we have to find a relevant generic emission factor. So it requires from us, of course, we make sure that we have a structured information, some post-treatment. It's not only the SAP extracted file.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's also related to the fact that we are not very mature on the purchasing information, maybe. So anyway, we had to make it more structured to make sure that we have the full information available for a carbometric platform. And in this case, purchasers' help was also needed to clean up this database information, as you presented, Blandine. It's basics to have it right. Of course, it helps. Right category, right phone number or email, of course. And as long as you cannot reach properly your suppliers, you cannot expect any information from them.
So thank you for this. What I gather is that, so there is, of course, a topic of data quality, and you mentioned it, the procurement data quality. And often we hear that the data quality of procurement is not enough to start decarbonizing, to start engaging supplier. And what I gather from your testimony, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that you actually didn't wait for it to be perfect, and you started by the supply engagement program and put everything in motion. And this was the trigger for your procurement team to actually start cleaning everything, collecting the contact details, classifying the expense, and maybe having a jump into the maturity and the quality that they're giving as procurement data. Is that right? or was it before?
Yes, totally. I think this is the right mindset for every initiative in terms of energy or ecological transition. You don't have to wait that everybody is ready and motivated to start the job, because it's a game changer for us. Of course, it's a change in every way of interacting with suppliers in terms of contract documentation, etc. So yes, you have to start with it's not even a pilot basically, because we had 8% of the database were already cleaned up, but it's a strong basis. You don't have again to wait that everything is perfect before you start, because otherwise you won't do anything. So yes, this type of, and I think this is very important to keep in mind. It's one of the way also to better know your suppliers, to better understand its constraint or their constraints, in order to have also a robust, sustainable, long-term partnership. This is really a trendy keyword, but this is also part of the sustainability of the whole system. And it's only one part of it.
Yeah.
You don't have to see it as a burden, additional burden, and paperasserie or bureaucracy, but it's really an element that helps understand the good conditions for suppliers to provide their most interesting sustainable products.
Thanks. And now we look at the screen, so we can see the key figures of your supplier engagement program. So we can see that you have a bit less than 2,000 suppliers, and that the campaign was run over 4 months. There's a 15% answer rate if you consider the amount of expenses that Getlink has. And we can see that now you have 30% of your expenses that are covered by a specific emission factor. So you touched upon the fact that this was in the end done in order to precise the data quality of your scope 3 on category 1 and 2. How do you plan to use this data that you collected and the specific emission factor and all the information that the supplier has shared through the questionnaire? How do you plan to use this internally and on the sustainability team?
So first, it was a good opportunity to make it clean. Again, as I said, we worked the 4 last years with some Excel sheet and some different interactions. So we imported part of this information to make sure that we continue using the information already given by the suppliers. So to have a clean baseline, I would say. I said that we had a target for the supplier carbon reduction by 2025, and we had to think of a new target by 2030. So having a good baseline for 2025, which becomes now our new reference year for the Scope 3 reduction target, was of course necessary. So we have put now additional target of reduction in GSG intensity over 3.1 and 3.2, so OPEX and CAPEX expenses for 2030 based on this 2025 reference. This was of course the core motivation, the core explanation of this initiative. But we also can think now of trying to extending a little bit the survey with asking maybe what support the suppliers need from us. I mean, it's again trying to understand more the supplier mindset and how they can be helped to reduce their carbon footprint. And it will be done basically by purchase category. This will be again something that we can do with the platform that was much more complex without it.
What do you mean? So you're saying that now you're going to also add into the questionnaire kind of the support that Getlink can provide to the supplier to help them in reducing and committing, and is it what you mean? Is it like creating with the key and critical suppliers kind of a branch to also help them move forward?
Yeah, I think the idea is to have a smooth way of interacting with them. I was referring, for instance, to know whether your supplier is SBTi aligned or not. Some type of information that was not easily capturable so far. Of course, you cannot manage it by email and asking the purchaser to collect everything. So this was really what I meant. But I think also in terms of interacting with the supplier, what we can try to develop also in the future, and this is what I mean with this improvement of relationship with supplier, is try to collectively to drive the reduction of Scope 3 related emission. So it will maybe what we think of using the platform is also being able to identify some best in class or worst in class by category, and to serve as a baseline, for expectations of new suppliers. So either choosing new suppliers or trying to say, okay, we work with you for good reasons, okay, technical one, contractual one, financial one. We see that potentially you are quite far from the average or from the top in class in terms of carbon. What are the reasons for this? Maybe we have miscalculated together the point, or you didn't have given any information to be able to perfectly refine its value, or maybe you use some specific options that we want to collectively to change in order for you to reduce your emissions. It is basically what we think of interacting with the suppliers in the future.
Understood. And this is a nice transition, and I will just take this one question because I think it smoothed nicely with what you're just saying. And sorry if I pronounce it wrong, but I think there's Gerd Colin that asked a question about what weight should be given to the GHG emission versus price when making business decision. And I think you touched upon the fact that there will be best in class, there will be worst in class suppliers. And so how do you plan to integrate this in actual selection? How procurement is receiving those criteria, those environmental criterion into selection? Did you start having kind of a conversation in, I know, internal carbon pricing or anything that would make this more concrete in terms of selection?
I think there are many ways of answering this question. First, we have to make sure that the suppliers is willing to give information. Okay, so of course there is a trend when you ask questions to suppliers. If every client asks this question, you can be sure that suppliers try to put himself in a position to answer his client just to survive. Okay, it's a typical marketing trend. But we also have to support this with specific clause in the contracts. Okay, we have upgraded a little bit our conditions générales d'achat, the generic terms and conditions of purchasing for us, saying that, okay, like you have your, some audit clauses, you can have some clause to make sure that the suppliers will answer the request to express the impact that he has, the negative impact on the environment, the risk of pollution, and the overall ESG footprint. Okay, this is also make sure that we get information and that he is totally aware of the criticality of answering such platform like Carbometrics in giving information. We also have another way of capturing this information is, of course, during the tendering process to assess the suppliers, and this is what we have in the framework of we call sustainable procurement. We have some criteria depending on the impact that we thought, that you think of this product and services. We could go deeper in requesting the suppliers to give lots of information. Do you have a decarbonization journey? Do you have a CSR corporate policy? Do you have a social actions that you put in place, etc.? So all this information to assess the sustainability and rank the sustainability between suppliers, okay? And the third point is that sometimes if we feel that, for instance, carbon is very important in the decision of the products, then we ask specifically a carbon footprint on the product, and we can compare between either two products of the same company or different suppliers in order to be able to capture the less carbonized product. And in this case, we have another tool in the company, which is called a shadow internal carbon pricing, which allows us to make an objective criteria. You know, if the product is 1,000 tons of CO2, I can compare it on a financial point of view with a product emitting 500. Okay, we have quite a very high price, whatever the price, but you can use this price in order to better compare and to incorporate this in your current tendering process.
Okay.
And I think the last one would be, of course, we could imagine also to try to, at the extreme points, when you have already tried to explain the supplier, it was important that you have selected your suppliers with incorporating the carbon footprint. At some times, you say, okay, like you do for the safety culture, for instance, or for the ethics culture, you say, okay, you do not play the game, you do not give us enough information regarding the carbon, then you will be excluded of future tendering process. You can imagine this is an extreme situation, of course, but this is the horizon we want to give to the supplier.
Okay. So currently, this is the I understand shadow internal carbon pricing that helps you also weigh in the carbon on the financial level whenever there's a clear difference between two suppliers and how intensive in terms of carbon they are. So it had happened, or it probably will happen, that you disregard a supplier even though price is lower because they have a tremendous gap in terms of carbon intensity. This is something that you are kind of committed to doing in regards with your SBTi commitment as well. That's what I gather from what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. It could be either automatic through this carbon pricing. If the carbon pricing plays in the other round, that is automatic. You follow the rules. And it could be also a little bit specific. Okay, the carbon footprint has not a huge impact, but we have a very more sustainable product. Then I get to the investment committee saying, okay, maybe this is a little bit more expensive, but we have limited the risk. We have a more sustainable approach. And we also, I didn't mention it, have a total cost of ownership when addressing this product. We're considering also the life cycle, operation footprint, etc., so that we have a full image. And we could imagine, yes, that even if it's more expensive, we could favor one supplier for this sustainability asset.
Okay. Thank you, Vincent, for precising this. So we're close to the end. I will ask you one last question if you have any advice. But before this, I will, we will start with this. And then there's a good question in the chat that I would like you to answer, and then we will take the exercise. But first, before to close kind of the discussion on the supplier engagement campaign and program, do you have any, I don't know, advice for other ESG directors here that might want to start? And if I look at the poll, I think there's a lot of them that are looking to improve the quality of the carbon footprint by having a supply engagement program, others that are also committed to SBTi, just like Getlink, and some others that have internal reduction targets, so no commitment yet. So what kind of advice do you have for them to start this kind of program?
So first, if they are playing or working with carbometrics, they are in good hand. I mean, and this is also the reason why we try to work with you, because you seem bringing some experience in the infrastructure industry, and again, it's very very useful because, and it was also the one of the reasons we choose to work with you, because I think the analysis of Scope 3 really depends on what is your core business. So for us, for instance, we are not manufacturers, so we do not purchase raw material and build it and construct products. So this is, and we much more purchasing little products and services, okay, and integrated services with some material, but very integrated. So it's very important to have this mindset that you had again with the experience in the infrastructure industry. And so once you have a good partner in this supplier assessment journey, I think maybe in terms of recommendation, even if again everyone is specific, but to be very clear on what you want to have in the platform. The Scope 3 and GHG emissions are relatively various. For us, for instance, we have some capital assets still, like cars, buildings, etc. So maybe you could choose to have it outside the platform to focus on a real supplier assessment in order for you to have a proper estimate of average intrinsic emissions. A second maybe recommendation will be to have it quite alive. The tool is a lively tool, and to not focus only on one time in the year, when you have to consolidate the Scope 3 accounting emission for your report, for your audits, etc. I think this is really important that the suppliers have the different opportunities to fill in this platform. You have to maybe to plan, but maybe 2 seasons over the year to make sure that we capture a maximum of information from the suppliers. So again, do not underestimate the time to ask people to prepare the file first from the expenses, internal files, then to ask people's suppliers to answer, to collect, to have some question, etc. So I think maybe to think of having 2 times in the year will be something interesting. And the last point will be very technical one, but again, we mentioned this emission factor by default. Again, if the supplier doesn't answer, what do I put for emission factor? And this matching between categories of purchasing and default emission factor has to be relatively well thought in advance in order to ease the process of collecting and putting the right information in the right place.
Thank you. So if I sum up, there's an issue to be prepared to make sure that the campaign is not a one-off, but it's something during the year. And you mentioned twice to be able to capture everything, and to make sure that everybody is prepared, even in the supplier side. So maybe some I don't know, engagement, and I recall that you conducted some webinars in order to also explain what Getlink was doing, and to make sure that the key suppliers would actually prepare themselves for the campaign, which can make it even more successful, because it's not something that pops up out of the blue in their emails. Thank you, Vincent. So now we will take the questions, and there's specifically one that still gets, and sorry again if I pronounce it incorrectly, that asks, maybe before we answer, because I think maybe Blandine has some intel on this, what are your thoughts, your personal thoughts, maybe on the new CSRD thresholds and the EU CSRD thresholds, and what does it mean for the decarbonization commitment in the market?
Okay, so regarding the new thresholds, I think first it excludes the wave 1 infrastructure, which is the main prime contractors who are still committed to disclose information on GHG emissions, and that will not stop the supplier engagement procedure, I think. For the small cap that could have the opportunity to not jump into assessing their own carbon footprint, I think basically maybe I will have 2 ways of answering it. First, as I said, the more client asking you the footprint, the more you have to get prepared, because at some point you could be excluded from some public tender. It's already the case. And from long-term perspective, if everyone around you is moving with a very detailed approach across the whole supply chain, you will have to get ready and to be able to answer a request. And the second point, it's again a question of robustness and long-term sustainability. I mean, making sure that you have your proper supplier engagement and your proper view of footprint is also a guarantee for you to identify where the weaknesses are in your supply chain, where your fossil fuel dependence are. And it's not only, again, a bureaucracy and another figure among others. I think I'm convinced that it helps you also as a company or as a buyer to make sure that you are reducing the risk of long-term activities and the risk in this bad new world we are experiencing. I think this is again something that we have to all together try to move forward. And maybe a last word here, when all are referring to the GSG protocol framework, I think this limits the risk of having questions asked differently from different clients. And I think even if the platform are not only exactly the same, if you get prepared to have a specific emission factor, to ask for the supplier to do the same, I think this will be globally worthwhile and efficient for everyone.
Thank you for your insights. I agree, but I will let Blandine add a word on what we think at Carbonmetrics on this.
Yeah, sure. It's true that we see that there is some ESG backlash and slowing down with the omnibus and planning of CSRD. But on the other way, as you mentioned, Vincent, and as we saw, there are other key benefits of engaging into decarbonization for the whole value chain and not only regulatory constraints. And also we work closely with the SBTi and many of our clients. We support them with SBTi commitment, and the SBTi has recently published figures about the number of companies that are submitting new targets every year, and this number is increasing every year. So this is a proof in a way that more and more companies are still interested to go that way, and that they really do it. And by committing to the SBTi, then they will also pave the way for their own suppliers. That will trigger another snowball for their own suppliers, etc. So the whole market is on the way still, despite this slowing down on CSRD or other bad signals from the USA, for instance, obviously. But yeah, we still have faith in the decarbonization of the market, especially in the EU.
Thank you. And we have one last question. Thanks for starting up this webinar. In addition to the mapping capabilities of the Carbonmetrics tool, I'd like to know if you also provide trainings, workshops, and tailor-made decarbonization strategies that will help suppliers set up their own SBTi targets. Thank you for this question, Aravind.
Yes, of course, we can provide this kind of services as our consultant can support both corporate clients like we did for Getlink with really tailor-made services, but then also for their own suppliers, and we can apply the same tailor-made logic to based on the needs of each corporate, what type of engagement is the most relevant. So, for instance, here you mentioned it, Agathe, to launch the campaign with Getlink suppliers. We started with different webinars to showcase the initiative and explain to the suppliers what's going on and what will be requested from them. So this was really tailored for Getlink's suppliers, but we could imagine anything that is required to meet your decarbonization goals or that of your suppliers, obviously.
Thank you, Blandine. We're coming to the end. I'm just saying because
maybe I guess sorry, maybe I missed maybe one point of Gert running question. If I may just in 1 second, the weight between the GSG and the price quality, I think it's really, of course, company dependent. But just to give an insight, we decided to put it between 5 and 10% of the overall tendering into CSR information. But of course, the more we are robust in information that base this calculation, the more we can increase it. I know that we have some partners in this railway industry going up to 20%. So it's really, once you are confident with the value, I think you can go upper. Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, it was a more precise answer to Gert's question. Key takeaways before we leave you on supplier engagement. So Vincent mentioned preparation and internal data quality, but it's not an obstacle. So it shouldn't refrain you from starting your decarbonization journey. It's long-term, of course. Decarbonization in long-term and scope 3 is no exception, even more so when it comes to engaging your supplier. And there's numerous benefits. So Vincent mentioned knowledge and relationship with the supplier, as well as, of course, the decarbonization, leverage, and procurement. So internal cooperation between two key departments that are the CSR or ESG department and procurement one. So I hope and we hope that you had an interesting moment and that you gained some insights from Vincent's testimony, Blandine and Emmanuel's explanation and demonstration of our platform. We will send you the replay, the slides, and the Q&As. So answers to this question will be shared in a few days. And if you need some help in decarbonization, you can reach out to Carbmetrics, and we'll be happy to discuss it with you. Thank you, and have a good day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day.